You know, on our television broadcast, Chris, Lisa Raitt, one of our expert panelists, called the whole exercise of a campaign a $600 million cabinet shuffle. What do we make of the outcome overall, in your view?
I don't think anybody will argue with the conclusion that not a single party achieved what they wanted when they headed into this campaign 5 weeks ago. For Justin Trudeau, that majority he felt he needed to be able to continue with his progressive agenda didn't materialize. Aaron O'Toole, with his move of the party from the political right, sort of made more far to the right into the political center, didn't cost him necessarily in the long run, but it certainly didn't provide a breakthrough where he needed it, which was in the Greater Toronto area, that big, rich beltway of seats around Toronto. Yves-François Blanchet, you mentioned, wanted 40 seats heading into the campaign, didn't come close to that. Have to wonder what was wrong with their campaign, especially given the boost the whole identity politics question would have given him post-English debate. And Jagmeet Singh, same thing, maybe a few more seats here, but by and large, he is also in the same place as where he started. It's going to be interesting to see how they all decide to work together when Parliament resumes, because clearly, as I said, no one is in a stronger position than they were in the last Parliament.
So many questions to ask based on that overview, Chris. If we focus on Justin Trudeau for a moment, the winner in terms of he will lead the party that forms government, but perhaps a brand diminished. Look to his future, the kinds of questions he may face from his own party. How will it be?
We spent a lot of time last night, Heather, talking about that very question with our political panelists, including David Hurley, who is head of the Gandalf Group, does the Hurley Burley podcast. There's a sense that he has a time that no politician who has won an election will walk away on his right away. Nobody will force him out at this stage. But it does raise questions that I think he will have to answer over the next couple of weeks, perhaps even longer, which is, why was this election called in the first place? When you sought a mandate and said only the Liberals could be trusted to rebuild the economy, only this government could be trusted to have the kind of progressive agenda that would allow Canada to see significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, to increase childcare, to allow more women to return to the workforce, to boost Canadian productivity. None of those things seem to galvanize voters at all. In fact, the biggest question throughout the campaign seemed to be about his own leadership. Certainly the opposition parties tried to capitalize on that. So is he a diminished leader? I don't think so, not necessarily yet. But there are questions about why this election had to be held, what he takes away from the fact that Canadians did not give him the mandate he so clearly desired.
But part of the interesting discussion on your program was, can we, as Canadians, expect to see minority governments? Will that be the norm in the future?
Yeah, that certainly is an interesting question, isn't it? Because of the way that the vote split again, with the strength of these various parties really lying in pockets and regions. There is no national party, really, because, for example, the Liberals didn't do very well again in the prairies, Alberta and Saskatchewan. The Ontario Beltway I talked about, the 416 and 905 ridings in the Greater Toronto area, didn't move at all to Aaron O'Toole, even though he has his own seat there. The NDP still strong in various regions, but shut out mostly in Atlantic Canada. If not, in fact, they were shut out completely. So all of this, suggests that no party has galvanized enough support to be able to call itself a national party to get that majority, which is 170 seats out of 338. And as you said, in the popular poll vote, it was roughly the same, 32, 33, 34%. That's not enough for a majority. It's certainly not enough to convince the Canadians that if more than a third of them, or more than 2/3 of them, don't really agree with the direction of the government, it makes it hard to say you have an opportunity to form a majority in the future.
In terms of the Conservatives, still the official opposition, but a disappointing night, as our experts and our election team acknowledged last night in our broadcast. And in Aaron O'Toole's concession speech, he did say they would take stock of what had worked and what hadn't. And he indicated he was there for the long haul, there to lead into the next election whenever it may come. Chris, will he have that chance?
That is the open question. Conservatives have not been inclined to give their leaders more than one. Stephen Harper and Andrew Scheer got one crack. Aaron O'Toole may also only get one crack. And I say that because there is significant opposition in terms of the broader Conservative community about that move to the center, that it became more of a liberal light kind of alternative as opposed to a really truly deep blue Conservative alternative. And Aaron O'Toole has to wonder, what does the rise of the People's Party and Maxime Bernier with his anti-immigration, anti-vaccination, pro-freedom agenda. What does that say about his ability to bring the party together with sufficient support across the country to be able to unseat the Liberals at some point in the future?
But could he, I mean, to be fair, I want to talk about the People's Party with you in just a second, but could Aaron O'Toole have done anything differently or otherwise? You know, the areas where he's criticized for not disclosing the vaccination status of his MPs or his candidates, for example, could he have done anything more without alienating the base?
Shakir Chambers, who's a Conservative strategist on our group last night, had 2 points that I thought were really interesting. One is that Aaron O'Toole really hurt himself with the flip-flop, the perceived flip-flop over lifting the ban on those 1,500 assault-style military weapons that the Liberal cabinet brought in back in May of 2020. He couldn't explain what he meant. He couldn't explain why he was reversing himself, other than to say, we are going to study it, but we didn't even know, listening to him, whether the result of that study, if it said keep the ban on those various assault-style weapons, would continue. So he hurt himself badly there. Secondly, a lot of questions about the style of his campaign. As you might remember, Heather, he spent a lot of it in that studio they built in the Westin Hotel in Ottawa. He did a lot of conference call or Zoom types of town hall sessions, and didn't travel perhaps as much as he might have or maybe should have to try and secure seats in this area and in southwestern Ontario, all of which, well, they may have been within reach, really didn't turn over in the numbers that the Conservatives needed.
And just finally, since you raised the People's Party of Canada and Maxime Bernier, Chris, David Cochrane on the television broadcast saying their popular vote, more than 5% nationally, big jump in popular support for them, enough to take maybe 7 or 8 seats away from the Conservatives. And yet, as we look to the future, what does the future look like? They didn't elect anybody, Chris, and once the vaccination issue is settled in the country, what becomes of sort of that as a galvanizing issue when they invite more scrutiny, look at the membership and their supporters and things of that nature?
That's a great question. There's a lot of people who sense that the COVID-19 controversy, especially around vaccinations, vaccination passports, requiring people to prove that they've been vaccinated to be able to get into restaurants and theaters in many provinces now, will dissipate. And that won't give the club that Maxime Bernier wielded over the course of the last week of the campaign to be able to use. That said, it may not disappear entirely, and having a divide on the right is certainly good news for progressives, Liberals, NDP as they look to the future. But, you know, it's hard to say at this point exactly what he will be able to accomplish. In some ridings, Heather, they had more than double-digit support. The People's Party of Canada really was a factor in some of the outcomes that we saw last night. So I think they're at least here for a while. Maxime Bernier is, as you said, inviting more scrutiny. There's a lot of things in that platform after you get past the vaccines that may not be palatable to many Canadians.
All I know is we're going to have many interesting conversations in the days and months to come of this minority government. I really appreciate this morning as I have your analysis through the campaign. Thanks as always, Chris.
Thanks, Heather.
Our national affairs editor, Chris Hall.